Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Chira Vanachari Yamuna Chira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Vijana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Chira Vanachari Yamuna Chira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 5, Narada Muni cursed by Prajapati Daksha. Texts 14 and 15. I'll do both. Because yesterday we did 13, didn't we? Is that all right? I mean, we missed 14 now, didn't we? It was, is it? What? Is that all right? You said 15, didn't you? And I didn't hear what you said about 14. Who are these guys, you know? Not, so we're reading from 14. Nana Rupatmano Buddhihi. Nana Rupatmano Buddhihi. Shariniva Punavita. Shariniva Punavita. Tanisham Agatasyeha. Tanisham Agatasyeha. Himasat Karmabir Bhavet. Himasat Karmabir Bhavet. Nana Rupatmana Buddhihi. Sveraniva Gunavita. Tanishtam Agatasyeha. Kimasat Karmabir Bhavet. Nana Rupatmano Buddhihi. Sveriniva Gunavitaha. Gunavita. Tanishtam Agatasyeha. Kimasat Karmabir Bhavet. Nana Rupatmano Buddhihi. Sveriniva Gunavita. Tanishtam Agatasyeha. Kimasat Karmabir Bhavet. Nana Rupatmano Buddhihi. Nana Rupatmano Buddhihi. Svareniva Gunavita. Tanishta Nagatasyeha. Kimasat Karma Vir Bhavet. Nana Rupatmano Buddhihi. Tanishtam agratasyeha kimasat karma bir. Anarupatmano buddhihi Swainiva gunabhita Anishtan agratasyeha Kimasat karma virvavet Nana various Rupa who has form or dresses Atmanaha of the living entity Buddhihi intelligence Sairini a prostitute who freely decorates herself with different types of clothes and ornaments. See what you mean? Where are we now? All right, here we go. Eva, like Guna Avita, Anvita, endowed with the mode of passion, and so on. Tatnishtan, cessation of that. Ratasya, of one who has not obtained. Iha, in this material world. Kimasat karma vihi bhavat. What is the use of performing temporary fruitive activities? Narada Muni has described a woman who is a professional prostitute. Haryashvas understood the identity of this woman. Mixed with the modes of passion, the unsteady intelligence of every living entity is like a prostitute who changes dresses just to attract one's attention. If one fully engages in temporary fruitive activities, not understanding how this is taking place, what does he actually gain? In response, please. Narada Muni has described a woman who is a professional prostitute. Haryashvas understood the identity of this woman. Mixed with the mode of passion, the unsteady intelligence of every living entity is like a prostitute who changes dresses just to attract one's attention. If one fully engages in temporary fruitive activities, not understanding how this is taking place, what does he actually gain? Probably comes in with it. Shall we do them both? Do them both. A woman who has no husband declares herself independent, which means that she becomes a prostitute. A prostitute generally dresses herself in various fashions intended to attract a man's attention to the lower part of her body. Today it has become a much advertised fashion for a woman to go almost naked, covering the lower part of her body only slightly, in order to draw the attention of a man to her private parts. For sexual enjoyment, the intelligence engaged in to attract a man to the lower part of the body is the intelligence of a professional prostitute. Similarly, the intelligence of a living entity who does not turn his attention towards Krishna or the Krishna consciousness movement simply changes dress like a prostitute. What is the benefit of such foolish intelligence? One should be intelligently conscious in such a way that he need no longer change from one body to another. Armies change their professions at any moment, but a Krishna-conscious person does not change his profession, for his only profession is to attract the attention of Krishna by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra and living a very simple life without following daily changes of fashion. In our Krishna-conscious movement, fashionable persons are taught to adopt one fashion, the dress of a Vaishnava, with with a shaved head and tea-like. They are taught to be always clean in mind, dress, and eating, in order to be fixed in Krishna consciousness. What is the use of changing one's dress, sometimes wearing long hair and a long beard, and sometimes dressing otherwise? This is not good. One should not waste his time in such frivolous activities. One should always be fixed in Krishna consciousness and take the cure of devotional service with firm determination. I'll just go through the other one, and then we'll cover both. Then guests can come in without any problem. Maybe later on we might get some more. Tatsanga Brahmishtavaishvaryam samsarantam kuhar yavat tadgatir abudasyeha kimasat karma bir bhavet. Just do the translation. Radhamuni has also spoken of a man who is the husband of the prostitute. The Haryashvas understood this as follows. If one becomes a husband of a prostitute, he loses all independence. Similarly, if a living entity has polluted intelligence, he prolongs his materialistic life. Frustrated by material nature, he must follow the movements of the intelligence, which brings various conditions of happiness and distress. If one performs fruitive activities under such conditions, what will be the benefit? But polluted intelligence has been compared to a prostitute. One who has not purified his intelligence is said to be controlled by that prostitute. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 2:41, Vyasayatmika Buddhir Eke Ha Kurunandana. Those who are actually serious are conducted by one kind of intelligence, namely intelligence in Krishna consciousness. Bahu Shaka Yanantascha Buddhya Buddhayo Vyavisayanam. One who is not fixed in proper intelligence discovers many modes of life, thus involved in material activities. He is exposed to the different modes of material nature and subject to various or varieties of so-called happiness and distress. If a man becomes the husband of a prostitute, he cannot be happy. And similarly, one who follows the dictations of material intelligence and material consciousness will never be happy. One must judiciously understand the activities of material nature, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 3:27. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimuda atma kataham iti manyate. The bewildered spirit soul under the influence of the three modes of material nature thinks himself to be the doer of activities which are in actuality carried out by nature. Although one follows the dictations of material nature, he happily thinks himself the master or the husband of material nature. Scientists, for example, try to be the master of material nature, life after life, not caring to understand the Supreme Person, under whose direction everything within this material world is moving. Trying to be the masters of material nature, they are imitation gods who declare to the public that scientific advancement will one day be able to avoid the so-called control of God. In fact, however, the living being, unable to control the rules of God, is forced to associate with the prostitute of polluted intelligence and accept various material bodies, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 13:22. Purusha prakritisto hi bhunkte prakrijan gunan karana gunasangasya sadasat yoni janmasu. The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that nature. Thus he meets with good and evil amongst various species. If one fully engages in temporary fruitive activities and does not solve his real problem, what profit will he gain? Om Ganti Mirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamini. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastachadi Satarine. So, you've not been out on Sankirtan for, well, have you been out on Sankirtan? I am. Just occasionally, is it? So you probably, it's like, we can see actually what's happening. I don't know what it's like in Scotland, it's a bit colder, but further south, it's like every year it gets worse. You know what I mean? It's like there's nothing left for the imagination hardly now. So, this is what it's talking about, is that, in fact, it says when Krishna was fighting against the demons, some naked demonesses appeared before him. He hadn't got anything on. So that's what it's leading to, just, like animal life. And so, when they told me once that the Gaudiya Math and the other mats, the other Sampradayas as well, there is some in South India, the Sri Sampradaya, Madhava Sampradaya. We are the Gaudiya Madhava Sampradaya. But, they're actually, they're amazed at what we're doing. They can't understand how somebody can live in the West and not only that, but preach and not be affected, And it's described, it's just Lord Chaitanya's mercy. Because we're in an impossible situation, they try. Pumsam Striya Maithanadi Bhavam Etam, it says in Bhagavatam, in the 5th chapter, 5th canto. Tarar Ridaya Granti Hogri Akshetra Subtapta Viter Janasya Mahoham Ham Mameti. He says this basic principle of material existence is the attraction between male and female. And everything's centered around that. There's nothing outside that. So what we see when people are acting in the material world, it's all centered around, attracting the opposite sex ultimately, or putting themselves in a position where they can enjoy the opposite sex. And so, we've got a situation now where we're just increasing that temperature, is it? Increasing the temperature. He says in Upanishads, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the temperature remain at 98.6, is it that right? 98.6 Fahrenheit. What's it in centigrade? 36.8 or something. The temperature remain at 98.6. He says we shouldn't raise it to 104, 5, 6, 7. And so this is what we do when we actually don't follow the directions of Shastra. We don't, we see that, in India, the Muslim situation is completely different. They're like, only this showing. So, they've really gone to town on it. And the women, So, but in the Vedic culture, the women would be allowed to express their natural inclination to dress nicely and, show their feminine beauty to some degree for the opposite sex. But it would be extremely limited. If sari is like, it shows the shape, but not overtly. It's like it's not so attractive as But gradually it's come that I remember. I don't remember actually, but I saw one film of the 1920s, maybe earlier than that, when they used to have a wrath cart. And in the wrath cart is where the women got changed. Then they used to pull it down to the sea. I've seen that. And they used to put it into the sea so much. Then they used to come out really quickly and get into the water. So that was considered really promiscuous at that time. Because, they used to walk about with big dresses, didn't they? And so I'll go through the purports gradually and then we can cover the points. So one thing that's mentioned here, actually, I noticed at the end of the class, it keeps, at the end of the purport, or at the end of the or at the end of the translation, if one performs fruitive activities under the condition, what will be the benefit? Then it says in the next one, if one fully engages in temporary fruitive activities, not understanding how this is taking place, what will he gain? And it goes on all the way through these purports. So there's two things that Shastra does. It gives us a very candid description of the material world in real terms. And that is meant to actually waken us up to that it's not enjoyable. So that's what section we're going through now. And then the other one is that we describe the glories of the spiritual world. And so Srila Prabhupada, when he was present, and Prabhupada, actually, I was once Sridhar Swami, he's left his body now. But I was serving him actually at one time when he was at the manor, when he was really ill. He was still walking about in that book. And in one class, the curtains opened and everybody got down. He says, you don't have to do that. He says, we're hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, we're hearing about Krishna and associating with Krishna. He said, just listen. Otherwise what happens is that, everybody bows down and then the speaker thinks, what we're talking about? You know what I mean? He loses the thread very easily. So, we can... Anyway, I actually promoted it by saying Jai. But I know Prabhupada was once giving a class. I heard it. I was listening on tape, and there was somebody going on the Vyasa, click, click. And Prabhupada said, what are you doing? He said, sit down. You're just disturbing me. It takes great concentration to give a talk. And then, a baby would start, and immediately Prabhupada would take him out. So that's what it's like, is that, anyway, we went off the point a little bit there, but we were talking about attraction between, we were talking about the two different kinds of message that the Bhagavatam gives. And Prabhupada, he specifically went to the 10th canto before he finished the rest of the Srimad Bhagavatam, didn't he? Because he knew that we need to understand the glories of the material world and you have descriptions of them. Chintamani prakara sadma sukalpa vriksha laksavriteshu surabhi abhipalayantam lakshmi sahasha satsam sevimanam govindam adipurusham tamaham bhajami. This particular first verse of this section of the Brahma Samhita by Lord Brahma is empowered by Krishna to explain the spiritual world. And he's explaining we hear this explanation and, almost immediately we can become attracted. What are we after in the material world? All the things that it's saying in that first. So it explains what the nature of the spiritual world is. And then it starts talking about the nature of Krishna. And and all the way through then it's, going into the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So in 10th canto, we cannot help but understand what the spiritual world is like just by reading it. We cannot help but understand, Krishna's nature. And we cannot understand the process help but understand the process of devotional service. And so we have to be like that, Raghunath was showing some concern about Srimad Bhagavatam, and I felt a little bit concerned. If somebody would have walked in who had not heard it before, I would have been very careful how I tried to explain it. And maybe it's better at this particular point, like you were saying, Raghunath, that we don't explain it. But still, Prabhupada wrote it, and he said we can start from any point in the Srimad Bhagavatam and get some ideas. So it's actually quite shocking, but it's meant to do that. It's meant to do that. And we may be a little bit careful in the temple when somebody's just getting their feet under the table, that's all. But ultimately, we have to come to that point of being brave enough to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. And if we're brave enough to do that, then we can actually really make progress in spiritual life, no doubt. Because, you know, we go into the material world, are they actually backwards at coming forward about presenting what they think is the truth? Definitely not. Every moment, so many newspapers, so many books are being written. You know, it's overt, it's in your face. So, you know, Prabhupada was actually it was in people's face. And it's shown in the Srimad Bhagavatam. You know, when he landed in London, the reporters came up and said, what's the purpose of our visit, Your Grace? He said, I've come to teach you what you've forgotten. You know, he didn't, you know, and they were shocked. And then another one said, oh, well, what do you think to London, Your Grace? Says, London's hell. And, you know, the reporter, he didn't know what to say. He was completely flabbergasted. And Prabhupada said, after some, you know, there's some lapse time, says, but in this, it's amazing how the British have created such a great empire from such a miserable place. So he let him off the hook a bit, but not completely, you know. And so, but we have to be careful. We can't necessarily speak like that because we don't have the deep realization, and you know, we can't follow it up. We may say something, and then you know, we may put ourselves in real hot water. So Prabhupada was, you know, he was able to control every situation, weren't he? According to what I've seen I mean, he went to America. We're going off the subject a little bit, but we were saying how powerful these purports are and how he's direct. So he went to America and he was there, and he actually made a statement about women. And he said, women are less intelligent. And then, you know, whoa, you know, that really hit the headlines. The next interview he had, the next crew that came, they were all women cameraman, woman interviewer, and all the backup were women. And, you know, then the interview really started to try and get into Prabhupada's ribs. And when she was talking, he says, he made all the obvious, he says, how can women be equal to men? He says, can men have a baby? You know, so he started on those terms. But then he went on to a further, he says, well, it really commented, in women, they have not found more than, he says, in men, the average brain substance is 64 ounces. And then he stopped for a while and said, in women, they have not found more than 34. And so he completely deflated the whole thing, you know. And at the end, he had them laughing, actually. So we can't necessarily, if we can, then we can do it. Like when one newspaper reporter came to him, and it was a woman, and she got one of these short skirts on. And Prabhupada said, yes, in our philosophy, we have warm legs and cool head. Not cool legs and hot head. And she started laughing as well. So, you know, preaching's a great art. You know, we have to be really careful what we say. If we say something, we can say it one way and people can accept it. But if we don't actually say it the proper way, it has a different way. Different effect, sorry. So, yes. So in one respect, you know, wait while the winter to do Sankirtan. That might be one way, but it's very distracting. And you have to be really fixed in your service. If you're fixed in taking shelter of Lord Chaitanya, then, you know, you can do it. But A very dangerous age. Let's have a read through the report. Yeah, it's talking about changing dress, like women will change their dresses regularly. They want a whole wardrobe so they can actually, look different in different situations. And it's also, Prabhupada mentions about men, about, growing beards. And so he mentions tea-like and shaved head. Or he said tea-like and short hair, didn't he? So yeah, and neck beads. That didn't mention neck beads. But what about dhoti and kurta? What do you think? Yeah.
At different times, he said different things. Many times he said it's not necessary to change your dress. You just follow our philosophy and follow the regular principles, and that's fine. And then other times he said, devotees should look like they've come from Vaikuntha. So
It's time, place, and circumstance. But, it depends who's there, who's he speaking to, like that. And so, yeah, the main thing is to spread Krishna consciousness. If you wear a red nose and it spreads Krishna consciousness, then it's all right. It's like that sort of course, within reason. And so we have to be a little bit, what can you say, lenient with preaching, and but when we live in the temple, we're very strict. Wearing dhoti and kurta. And actually, Prabhupada, he never told anybody to do that. They started doing it because he wore it. And another example of how lenient, not lenient, but how adaptable he was to situations for the purpose of preaching, was the temple in Los Angeles. When they first bought it, it was a church. And Prabhupada actually said that don't change anything. There were pews there where people sit down. There was they call them pews, what they call them. And there's a big dais, is it? Where the vicar gets up and starts preaching. He said, just leave it like that. He said, people are used to this. Let them keep their shoes on. In fact, once one devotee came in, one person came and said, do I have to take my shoes off? He says, I didn't say you had to take your shoes off. And he said, and then we'll just preach Krishna consciousness. So that's the thing is, whatever vehicle helps us to preach Krishna consciousness, then we can adapt that. But, we're very strict with our own practice. So that's why we need a fulcrum of devotees to actually, reciprocate with, so we keep it strong. So when, this is being repeated over and over again through a section. So when something's repeated, it means it's important. Vichaya vinivartante niherashidenam raso varyam asopishna param drishva nivartate. So we're talking about, there's association with Vani. That means reading these books. By reading these books, we can become fixed. So, and then there's Vapu, which means that we have to take personal association of devotees. And it's well documented that Vani is more important than Vapu. It's more important to hear the message, obviously. But Vapu also has a big part to play. Because, unless we actually see the real article, it's not a complete picture. It's not a complete training, is it? We can understand, but unless we actually get association, especially of somebody who's actually, making a lot of advancement, or is higher than us at least, then we can follow that. It's very inspiring when somebody can actually apply the philosophy and we see it working. So that's important. This is why this is the purpose of the spiritual master, isn't it? That it's an example of Krishna consciousness. And this is given in Srimad Bhagavatam, in 1 to 18. Is it 1 to 18? Does anybody know that verse? I forgot it now. What's that? No, that's 17. Nasto prayeshu abhadreshu. Nat nityam bhagavata sevaya. Bhagavati uttama shloke. Bhaktir bhavati naisaki. And in that purport, it said, by regular attendance in classes on Srimad Bhagavatam and by service to the devotee, pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. And in the purport, Prabhupada makes a point that there's two Bhagavats. There's the book Bhagavat and the person Bhagavat. He says, so we have to, first of all, we have to hear from the book Bhagavat, or we have to hear book Bhagavat from person Bhagavat. He makes that point. And also Bhagavat means that, there's that personal example. Acharya, that's what Acharya means. And then going to the next one. Vyasamya Vyatmika Buddhi Ekeha Purnamana Bahu Shakyanantascha Pureo Vyavisayanam. So, if first quality of a woman, what's the first quality of a woman? Shyness. And by shyness, it is chastity, yeah. Chastity, because the woman, Prabhupada describes woman like fire, man is like butter. That's how it's designed. It's Krishna's design that's the way it is. Even in the spiritual world, it says that Krishna's not, he's actually aloof from everything. But when we read about, in the 10th canto about Srimati Radharani, it seems to be a different thing, because if Srimati Radharani says something like, oh Krishna, please accept this devotee. He's much better than me. Krishna has no option but to... So in that way, under the shelter of the pastime potency, things are going on like that. But from a material point of view, Krishna is actually not attracted at all. But in the same way, this spiritual world is reflected into the material world. This material world is a reflection. So that dynamics is still there. And so therefore, if the wife's a prostitute, it means how can the man be peaceful? That's the first symptom of femininity, just be chaste. Then it's going to be hell for the man. And they don't realize that the tendency is that a man wants to show his wife off nowadays. Is that right? He don't mind if she's dressed, really provocatively. He feels like proud, because he feels that this is my wife or this is my girlfriend, look how fortunate I am. But he doesn't realize that, if he carries on in that way, at some point she may be attracted to somebody else. And that happens. And so, the safety net is that, the woman is actually chaste to the husband and dresses moderately. In that way, he's safeguarding his own destruction. So many times this happens nowadays, especially nowadays. There's not even any are there marriage vows? There's still marriage vows to some degree, but they're not taken so seriously, are they? By most people. Most people just decide to hitch up with a partner. And many times you see two people together, you say, oh, this is my partner. So that's not good for a woman. She's not protected at all. If the man decides that, okay, I've had enough, she's stranded, unless she has a job, of course. So we can understand that, modern civilization is really going down the wrong path. And therefore, to follow Shastras always proves in the long run that it's correct. Temporarily, we may get some temporary satisfaction from what we're doing, but it'll end in misery. Why? Because it's based about this first verse talks about the mode of passion. The mode of passion means material enjoyment, and the epitome of the mode of passion is the attraction between male and female. And what does it say in Bhagavad Gita? It says it's the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world, this lust, and it burns like fire. So we want to avoid that. So a devotee, many times a devotee will say to you, are you peaceful? Have you heard that? And when first time someone said to that, I said, what do you mean? I'm a peaceful. He says, are you relatively free from sex desire? That's what it means to be peaceful. Nobody in the material world are free from that. It's like aggravating. What is it? Aggravating or a force beyond our control, which is pushing us all the time. But a devotee can be free from that. He can have peace. And what is the peace formula? What? That, first of all, we understand Krishna's position. Krishna is the controller of everything. He's not the peace formula for you. If we've got to enjoy space, it's like, And Krishna is the enjoyer of everything. But Krishna is the well-wishing friend of everybody. Suridam Sarvabhutanam. So, this is a peace formula. That Krishna's in charge of the situation. I just have to take shelter of Krishna. And when we do that, then we actually become freed from the influence of the material energy and we feel peace. So we can stop there. Does everybody any questions or comments? Are we on the telly?
Thank you, Maharaj. You were mentioning the need for, like Prabhupada was saying, it was okay to wear shoes inside the early temples. This used to attract. So could you maybe comment on the danger of practicing devotees becoming too attached to to sort of the way they've done it, becoming slightly ritualistic, and therefore not being able to adapt to, bring in more people?
Who shouldn't adapt? Who will find it difficult to adapt?
Or sometimes I even find myself that we have a nice way of life here and we don't want to adjust that in order to bring in more people.
Oh, you mean we don't want to change too much? Or change unnecessarily?
More that we don't want to change because sometimes I find myself it can be too comfortable, And
Too comfortable.
So we're attached to a nice way of life here, and we don't want to sort of change things in order to attract people.
Yeah, I mean, by experience, we can overcome that. In the beginning of devotional service, we're very attached to doing everything because we're actually very cautious of the. We know that it's very fresh in the mind what the material energy is like. We're on the run. It's like we're on the run. You know what I mean? But after some time, we have to, we have to have a break. We can't keep running. And so that's what happens as we become more experienced. We learn how to, live in this world, but not lose our consciousness, but be able to actually express ourselves in a suitable way to attract people, and live in a suitable way to attract people without being affected by them. You understand what I mean? And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says I think it's a nectar of instruction. What do they call an nectar of instruction? It's the, I forget what they call it, but he expands on it more. And he says, on about association. He says, if we're not absorbing ourselves at what other people are actually talking about, then that's okay. So, but if we're fixed in our own consciousness, we can associate and not be affected. We have to be careful, of course. So that's the thing, is that we're of the world, but we're not in it, like Jesus Christ said. We have to be functioning in the world, but, in a different consciousness. And in a consciousness of seeing things for what they really are. This is why we hear Bhagavatam every day. And being able to actually assimilate what's going on. It'll make us more Krishna conscious. So, that's what we have to... It gradually comes as we distribute books, distribute the holy, and we're interfacing with experienced devotees, and we're able to actually deal with it more and more, But there's a limit. We can't go, over that limit, otherwise we're going to become attracted. Prabhupada said we have to, according to our particular strength and ability, we have to catch the fish, but not get wet. In other words, you don't get such a big fish that you go in instead of the fish coming out. Yeah.
Maharaj, I love a lot of kind of accommodating the mentality of the people who come in contact with Krishna consciousness. A lot of that accommodation means to reduce the level of austerity, perhaps, so that when people first come to a temple or an ashram, they're not asked to follow quite such a strict standard as, say, the brahmacharis do. However, sometimes people come to the temple to look for austerity, and because they've heard that the Hare Krishnas have got a good reputation of being very austere, and then perhaps there's a danger that when they come, they're disappointed. I can think of examples of that happening, of people coming here and just looking disappointed, and that that things.
They must be austere then.
Sorry?
I said they must be austere. I'll tell you a story, shall I?
I just mean perhaps in
Oh, you carry on.
Yeah, just perhaps in the prasadam hall, for example. Yeah. We used to sit on the floor and eat with off paper plates or whatever, and no. I mean that's a kind of very sort of, that's an example, but I think it's more on a sort of it's not so much on a physical level, but more that people sometimes can perceive that it's not like a strict ashram, because unless they come to stay in the brahmachari ashram. I'm not saying that our brahmachari ashram is not strict, but because we're creating spaces for people to feel comfortable, then is there not a danger that we're missing out on?
Have you noticed that?
I have noticed it once or twice.
Where are these?
Sorry?
Where are these people coming from? Maybe from the Highlands, eh? I knew.
No, they may be coming from other kind of other spiritual traditions. They've been like disillusioned with their own spiritual traditions, and that they've heard that we are like more serious, or perhaps they're coming from working in like for charitable organizations in the third world, or and they've kind of roughed it for many years, and
Yeah, I mean, I have not noticed that so much actually. I usually find that, people find that getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and before is like austere. And then, going through Mongol arti, chanting and that, after they've done it for a few days, they feel the benefit. But I find that I can't say that I've really come across anybody who's been disappointed that it weren't austere enough. I mean, maybe it's different north of the border. I don't know.
well, I think okay, sorry. I think it was more in terms of the nature of the conversation, because we're trying to make people feel comfortable in the sense.
I mean, you're austere, aren't you?
No. So
He's austere. I remember what somebody were telling me when back in the old days, they were all taking prasadam and Java were walking around. Does anybody want any cold fennel tea? No, I mean, sorry. Badrinarayan, have you heard that story, Badrinarayan? He was temple president in a place near Chicago, I think. Small temple, and anyway, I'll tell it for everybody's benefit. And somebody knocked at the door one day, and they went, and this young person, he said, "I want to join the temple." So, that's you don't really know anything. And he said, "No, I'll follow it's 4 o'clock in the morning, this, that, and the other." He said, "No." He says, I think he may have visited, and after a few days he did this, but he said, "Look, I just want to stay in the temple. I'll join, but I don't want to go outside. I just want to stay in the atmosphere of, the temple." And okay, no problem. And then after about, he was doing really well, he was starting to advance and really took a taste. He really got a taste for devotional service. Then after a year, he went to Badrinarayan. He said, "I've got to admit something, actually." He said, "What's that?" He says, "I'm wanted by the police." And so Badrinarayan was thinking, "Oh, God." He said, "Well, the best thing to do is that, we go to the police station and you own up, and we'll do it the right way." So he said, "All right." So they took him to court, and the judge urged both sides of the story, and he says, "Tell me, young man, what's your lifestyle?" He said, "We get up between 3 and 4 every morning." He says, "Then we do some loud prayers for half an hour, then some quiet prayers for 2 hours, then some more loud prayers for half an hour, and then we have a class on Shastra, and then we have something to eat." He says, "Then after that, we have a left-hand side for half an hour, so, and then we're doing service for 8 hours." And he says, "Stop." He says, "What did he say?" He says, "Let him stay where he is." He said, "It's more austere there than it is in prison." So, but it'll go off in a minute. So, I mean, what I used to happen when I was in the ashram, well, I'm still in the ashram, I suppose, but when people come, we used to say, for first few days, you can get up at, for Guru Puja. And then, if you get, as you get inclined, you can, we used to tell them later about you can get up to Mongol arti, But anyway, we have to, I think the thing is that association's so important. And if we're a good association, that'll actually overcome a lot of things, you know what I mean? If they feel, these are real nice guys, it'll actually overcome all, which is what smaller issues. And it's maybe that they're just checking us out, you know. It says in Bhagavad Gita, don't it, that people say the devotees are actually low-key, low, not very high transcendentalists due to our lifestyle. You know, we're not like impersonalists and yogis. They are much more austere. He says, but when they try to practice it factually, they don't maintain it. So, you know, you could put that forward that, well, if you don't find it austere, you know, just try it. It's actually an internal process as well. And just try it for a week or two and see whether you think it's austere or not. Yeah.
They're austere in their eating habits. They're willing to go without dairy and things like that, even though they have an
They're
attraction.
willing to do what?
Go without dairy. Vegans.
Oh, vegan.
Yeah, so they can be austere in the sense that they're not
vegan,
willing
yeah.
to, and they're doing it for a high cause and things like that. And then they see us on a Sunday feast, you know. So in that sense, they could see us as less than, but then we've got to maybe preach the higher spiritual principles. But
Yeah. Yeah, that's what happens. I once in, they call it, there's a big store in Manchester which sells only organic things. It must be a vegan place. I was going about, I said, help mate. I said, have you got any honey? And they said, we don't have honey in here, you know. So they've got completely the wrong idea. Because Krishnas are in the equation, they create their own standards. What to do in that situation? You know, what you're doing here is you're having vegan food. So that's commendable. But do we just take vegan food, you know? Maybe you can have, anybody who takes vegan food, eat in there, or somebody else may. And then it's a difficult one, isn't it? There's two different ways of looking at it.
Because some see the higher principles that they're willing to forego their veganism for the duration that they're here. But sometimes, and then they vegan when they come. I mean, others are strict vegan all the way through and so on. But they kind of like I think Louis here because he sees that we've got a lot to offer the world. So although he's vegan also, and he wants to experience and have the experience of being amongst like-minded people in that way, as far as I know. So even though he's vegan, it's not so much. But when a vegan comes, then everyone becomes a vegan. So it's respecting them in that way.
I'm a little bit hard of hearing, you know, I actually got an hearing aid. It's really... I must borrow rampers. Yantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Jai.